Hello and welcome to our webinar on developing America's next generation of leaders. This is an introduction to the White House Fellows Program, and you are hosted by the White House Fellows Foundation, an association which is the Alumni Group. My name is Margarita Colmenares, and I'm joining you tonight from Sacramento, California. But in 1991, I was living in Los Angeles when I was selected as a White House Fellow. And I want to share with you that even though I was working in the private sector, my background is environmental engineering. And even though I had that technical background, as a White House Fellow, I was assigned to the US Department of Education. And I worked for David Kearns, who had retired as the CEO of Xerox Corporation, and he was my principal at the US Department of Education. And today I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the White House Fellows Foundation and Association, which is your host today. Next slide. Before we get started, I want to, you have just seen on your screen a pop-up poll that we'd like for you to fill out. Throughout the webinar, you're going to see different pop-up polls like this. Please, if you don't mind, tell us who you are. We want to know more about who you are and keep you, and also, just keep this line of communication going. So thank you for filling that out. So today I am joined by the stellar cast. I want to start out with, and if you look at their class years, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that there's different class years that are represented. You're going to hear about each person in more detail later, and I will come back to introduce Nadine right after a video that you're going to see. Next slide. So just to recap, the White House Fellows is considered by many to be the nation's premier nonpartisan, and I want to emphasize that part, leadership and service opportunity. And over the past 55 years, we have served 10 different presidential administrations. And what this means, and there's about 800 of us or so of alumni, and what this means is that in any given year, you might have Democrats and independents serving under a Republican president, and vice versa. You might have Republicans and independents serving under a Democrat. So in my particular case, for example, I'm a Democrat, but I served under Bush Sr. When I was at the US Department of Education. Next slide. When the White House Fellows was first envisioned, the whole idea was to foster and strengthen future leaders like you in the audience to better serve our communities and our nation. And it was felt that one way to do this was to allow people to come in from the outside to serve at the highest levels of government and learn what government was about and take that information back to your communities and to your future path. Next slide. So we want to encourage people from all walks of life to please consider this opportunity. We also have in our audience probably some folks who maybe know someone, we call them influencers, those who can help us identify other White House Fellows who should apply. So the big takeaway from this is that we want you to check us out, to see if there's a good fit, and if there is, we want you to apply. If not now, then in the future. Thank you. Next slide. And next slide after that. I'm going to give you just a short overview of what we're going to talk about today. Besides the general overview that you're going to get about the program, we're also going to talk to you about what resources are available to you online 24/7. And the best part of the program is what we call the Alumni Reflections. All the panel that you see here to my right is going to be speaking to you more with, I think, more insightfulness about what the program is about, and they're going to share with you their individual stories. And at the very end, we're going to have a question and answer period. Make sure, I know that some of you already submitted questions. but you can also submit questions during the webinar in the chat section, and we will be answering those as the webinar proceeds. If there's any questions that we don't get to, we will get back to you in a timely manner. Okay, next, I think we're going to introduce a video. And this is a video that we put together that gives you an overview of the White House Fellows Program.
What we're trying to do is to find here in this country, yes, here in the White House Fellow, a combination of an idealist with vision and a pragmatist with judgment.
This program goes back for 55 years and stretches across all departments of government and presidencies and administrations. And it's an incredible program, and I hope everyone listening will encourage others to apply, to learn more about this. It's something that everyone should know about, even though they may not be a fellow themselves. It's a rich part of the White House tradition, and we're very grateful to President Johnson and those around him for establishing this program.
Founded in 1964, this prestigious program puts the best and brightest physicians, military officers, academics, business leaders, and others to work in the highest levels of government, with direct access to the White House, cabinet secretaries, and world leaders. Many of its alumni have gone on to greater achievement. Colin Powell, historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, Senator Sam Brownback, Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal, to name just a few.
I learned most of all how you champion good causes and how you stand up and fight causes that are not good, how you take risks for doing that which is right. And so for me, it was a very formative experience, one that I've treasured ever since.
Year after year, I've enjoyed working with the White House Fellows. Each and every one brings a variety of talents and energy into the government, and in many ways represents my best hopes for our future.
What kind of person do I think should apply for the program? I think would be someone who is committed to servant leadership, just as John Gardner would have said, someone who is ready to give back.
We expect a lot out of you. We expect you to go back to your units or your businesses or your universities or perhaps government agencies and lead, to set high standards, to set a good example, and to serve something greater than yourself. That's what the Fellows Program is all about.
I had this amazing fellowship year. I worked for the First Lady, Hillary Clinton at the time. I think what was interesting is in the beginning of the fellowship, you're sort of trying to find your way and you do everything. And then all of a sudden, by the midpoint of the year, someone comes up to you one day and says, "We have a speech for the First Lady tomorrow. Do you want to write it?" It's these sudden baptisms throughout the year that are wonderful. You feel like you're absolutely not prepared. You can't do it in some ways, and then all of a sudden, you're doing it. And when a year goes by, you can't believe it's over. I think in many ways, the year as a White House Fellow has shaped the rest of my life.
Okay, welcome back. So I said to you at the beginning of the program that I am on the West Coast, and now it is my great pleasure to toss this over to Nadine Gracia on the East Coast. Nadine is a high-level executive at Trust for America's Health, which is a nonprofit advocacy group, and they have been very busy, especially during this pandemic, on policy matters, legislative matters that affect all of our lives. So with that, I would like to welcome Nadine to take over the program from here. Nadine.
Great. Thank you, Margarita, and good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to co-host this informational webinar on the White House Fellows Program. We've done some specific outreach to alumni of historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, and we have other diverse professionals who are joining us this evening, and we're so excited to have this conversation with all of you. As Margarita said, my name is Nadine Gracia, and I served as a White House Fellow in 2008 to 2009, which was a transition year. So my class started in the Bush administration and completed our fellowship year in the Obama administration. And I can attest to the White House Fellowship being such a transformational experience for me. So I want to thank you for joining us and for your interest in the White House Fellowship. I'm so excited that you're here with us, and you really are in for, I think, an inspiring and informative conversation with some of our wonderful alumni. Please do keep putting your questions into the Q&A, and as you'll see, our panelists, as well as David Moore, who is our Executive Director of the White House Fellows Foundation and Association, will be answering those questions. Next slide. So after seeing the video, I really want to delve in a little bit more into the program itself. Who are the fellows, and what are the selection criteria? As a reminder, this is a program that is for leadership and public service. And so fellows demonstrate really a record of remarkable professional achievement early in their career. And they demonstrate, the strong types of leadership skills and the potential for growth, both in professionally and personally, and that they have a demonstrated commitment to public service and the skills that really are needed to succeed in working at the highest levels of the federal government. To be eligible for the fellowship, you must be a U.S. citizen, and federal government employees are not eligible unless you are career military. Next slide. So there's a President's Commission on White House Fellowships that oversees the fellowship program along with the commission director. And it's the commission that selects the White House Fellows class each year. And it makes sure that the program is keeping to the spirit of its founding. It's the commission director who oversees the day-to-day management of the program. And it's in the executive order that President Lyndon Johnson signed that established the White House Fellows program, that called for each class to have about 11 to 19 fellows. And in each class, you see a diverse array of professional backgrounds, educational backgrounds, civilian and military, and more. And fellows work either in the White House or in a cabinet department or agency. Now, the program is 1 year. It runs from September through August. And importantly, we get this question often about whether or not this is a political program. And the answer is no, this is not a political program. It is a nonpartisan program where, again, the focus is on leadership, and the fellows represent a broad range of political views: Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and more, which adds to really the breadth and depth of the program. The fellowship is a paid fellowship experience. Next slide. So let me just point out the information that we're sharing with you tonight that Margarita has outlined, and in the video, and the information that I'm sharing with you is available online. You can visit our website, the White House Fellows Foundation and Association website, to get access to this information. And we're certainly speaking to you as well today because we are in the midst of the application period for selecting the next class, which will be the class of 2021 to 2022. And that'll be the class that starts next year in September 2021. And you can access the application on the White House website. And the deadline to apply to enter into the next class is January 6th of 2021. Next slide. On the website, you'll get a whole host of resources. It's the selection criteria, some of the things that I just mentioned to all of you, as well as the process, with regards to the written application that is required, that entails responding to essay questions, your resume, as well as letters of recommendation. There's also additional information on the eligibility requirements. And then the process beyond the written application, where if you're selected, there are subsequent processes with regards to regional interviews and then the national finalist interviews. Next slide. Now, as we noted, one of the purposes of this webinar is really to encourage emerging leaders in all fields to consider this opportunity. And We know, for example, that HBCUs are such excellent institutions that produce stellar alumni who are leaders and emerging leaders in their fields, which is why we're hosting this webinar with all of you tonight. This slide just shows you a snapshot of some of the White House Fellow alumni who are also HBCU alumni. And as you can see, they represent several generations of White House Fellow classes. They represent diverse professions from law to education, the military, and a whole host of areas. And you'll also hear from the panel that we have tonight that they also represent a breadth of HBCUs. On this slide, you're seeing a lot of Howard University alumni, and we love Howard University. You might hear a little bit of healthy competition from our alumni who are here on the panel tonight, representing their institutions very proudly, and I think that's going to be an exciting discussion and conversation to have. But as you can see, really the breadth of the alumni and the contributions they've made in society in their various fields. Next slide. Here's a photo of our current class, the class of 2020 to 2021. They just began the fellowship program in September and really are doing important work in the various federal agencies, in the cabinet departments, and in the White House. And we'll have the year-long fellowship experience that will then end in August of 2021. So we're very excited to have these leaders be a part of this program and the contributions that they will be making. Next slide. Now, some of you who are participating in the webinar tonight, you might be a mentor, you might be an administrator, a faculty member, another influencer who can help us in spreading the word about the White House Fellows Program. So we want to encourage you to please share this information. You can highlight it in your organization's communications. If you'd like us to do presentations, we're happy to come and present to your organizations or institutions and your networks to be able to share the information about the fellowship program. And again, to visit our website to get access to those resources. Next slide. So now I want to move into really the highlight of the evening, which is speaking directly to some fellows and hearing from them and sharing their reflections to talking about what they were doing prior to their fellowship experience, where they were placed, their work assignment in their fellowship experience, what they learned, what some of the highlights were, and how the fellowship has really influenced their journeys since their time of being a White House Fellow. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome in my fellow fellows. Hello, everybody. How are you? We've got some waves for folks joining us from around the country. So we're going to do this in a really conversational style. And again, please do keep asking questions. We'll start out with a few rounds of questions, and then we will also have David Moore help us with some of the Q&A that's coming through the chat to help us with additional questions that our panelists can answer. So why don't we kick it off first with everyone doing some brief introductions of themselves, just describing what you were doing before the fellowship, before you were a White House Fellow, what your work assignment was as a fellow, and what you do now. Crystal, why don't we start with you, Crystal Moore.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I'm Crystal Moore. I'm joining you from Jackson, Mississippi, my home state of Mississippi. I am a proud graduate of Xavier University of Louisiana, third generation HBCU grad. So I'm so grateful to be on the phone or be on this webinar with everyone. I was a 2017 to 2018 fellow. So I most recently served in the Trump administration, where I was placed in the Domestic Policy Council. I worked on the President's Initiative on HBCUs, which was incredibly meaningful to me, given my background in HBCUs and just commitment to these institutions. Prior to the fellowship, I was working in education technology, spent some time in management consulting at the Parthenon Group, but most of my career has been in the education and workforce space. After the fellowship, I joined Strategic Education as Vice President of Higher Education Partnerships, where I lead our work with colleges and universities, helping colleges to go online and transition to virtual education. The only other thing I would say is just serving as a White House Fellow was transformative for me. You know, when I look back on the year, I can't imagine the personal growth and leadership that I've achieved. So I'm looking forward to sharing more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Crystal. And as you can see, proudly representing the Xavier University, we might have to have our panelists also do a little stand up so everybody sees the great gear that they're wearing representing their alma maters. Let's go next to Louis.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Louis Long. I was a fellow. I'm the senior of the bunch. Next year will mark 25 years, actually. And it was a transition year also that I was a fellow. It was actually a transition year between the first and second Clinton terms. And I worked at the Office of Management and Budget. I worked with the Interagency Task Force on DC. DC is my hometown. During that period, the city of DC was under control board, and it was bankrupt city. And the director of OMB had and was encouraged by the president to help fix the finances of DC. And I worked on that and developed and led an interagency task force on economic policy. So all of what you see today in terms of home ownership, growth and values, and the growth in population back then, DC had about 500,000 residents. It's pushing beyond 700,000 residents now. And we were looking to solve that problem back in 96, 97. And so I only go into more detail on that is that because being a fellow and working on that policy initiative, I had a direct hand in helping transform my hometown. And so that was really fulfilling and continues to be to this day. Now, I actually am an art dealer, and I own an art gallery in Harlem, New York. And I also am the associate director of the art gallery at Columbia University. And it may seem like a contradiction of sorts, but actually I always track my interest in collecting of art back to our fellows' global excursion to Mozambique and South Africa. And that's where I started to collect art. And I came back. Everyone thought I was crazy at the time. David Moore will attest. I probably had 2 large suitcases that I purchased while I was there with rolled up canvases and sculptures and clay items, which I still have to this day, but that got me started. So, yeah.
Great, thank you, Louis. And we're definitely going to talk about that, the career transitions and the connections that can be made as a result of the experience, and really great to hear about the impact that you had on your hometown. All right, Sharlethia Franklin, let's have you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Nadine. Hi, good evening, everyone. I wish I could see your faces so I could feel more connected, but the good news is there are so many of you on the call that we couldn't do videos for everyone. But I am Sharlethia Franklin, coming to you from my home in Washington, D.C., but like Crystal, I am from Mississippi. I will forever be a country girl from the little tiny town in the Mississippi Delta. But unlike Crystal, my hometown is quite small, but we just got our first traffic light a few years ago. So we're basically in New York now. So but I was part of the 2013-2014 class of White House Fellows, and it's so interesting to see everybody's faces on the video because everything is coming full circle. A lot of these people are the reason that I became a White House Fellow and was able to get into the program. So Eric, I have plenty of stories to share about you later. But I served in the Department of Justice in 2013 to 2014 and worked directly with then Attorney General Eric Holder. Before that, I was in private practice at a big law firm in Atlanta. And after that, I actually stayed on. You saw the video about encouraging all of us to go back home. I am sure I will one day, but I decided to stay in DC and work for then Attorney General Holder, and then became Deputy Chief of Staff and counselor to Loretta Lynch. And after that, I went back to the law firm. I took 7.5 months off to travel and sleep because I needed sleep after that job. And I've been spending the past 2.5 months actually on a brief hiatus from the firm. I was appointed to the Biden-Harris transition team, so we're helping to stand up the Department of Justice for the incoming leadership. So all of that has come certainly full circle from the White House Fellowship, and it is single-handedly the reason that I have been able to do everything that I've done over the past 7 years. So excited to talk to you all about that process, and happy to see so many of you on.
Wonderful, thank you, Sharlethia. All right, and let's go to our final panelist, Eric Caulfield.
Hi, everyone. Eric Caulfield, proud graduate of that most august of institutions, Morehouse College. And shout out to all my Bison Howard brothers and sisters and Xavier as well. Like Shirlithia, I wish that I could see you all's faces, but I know in this Zoom world, I can feel you. And I know even in your 1-inch by 2-inch grid Zoom space, you are beautiful. I can feel you, my HBCU brothers and sisters and siblings. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'm class of 10 and 11. And at the time, I was actually working in Newark as a chief policy advisor to Cory Booker when he was mayor in Newark at the time. And I was placed at the Domestic Policy Council at the White House working for Melody Barnes, who was the director at the time. And my two day-to-day reports were Carlos Monje and Derek Douglas, who were special assistants to the president on urban policy related matters. And since then, I think I couldn't get away from it quite. One of the projects that I worked on was the SC2 initiative. And so I actually got to come back to my home state in Louisiana. I'm from Baton Rouge. I'm in New Orleans now, which is where I came to work, serving as a liaison between the White House and the mayor's office and managing an interagency federal team before I started my consulting company, which actually this month turned 7 years, so lucky 7. And all of it traces back to a lot of the work that I did in DC. And I'm just really excited about talking about more about, as everybody talks about it being transformational, it really was and certainly was in my case. And so really excited to be here and talk to you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate that. And Shirlithia, I'm going to let you hop back in.
Well, you know, for those of you who are on from the 2 best HBCUs on the planet, I did this on purpose. I wanted Eric to go first so I can jump back in and tell you the 2 schools that I am from. But I'm wearing a Howard sweatshirt. I'm not sure if you can see it, but all of my Tougaloo College family will never let me live this down if I did not represent Tougaloo. So for the Tougaloo fam, I have a cup here and my coaster. So I have the privilege of being a double HBCU alumni.
Did I not promise you there'd be a little bit of healthy competition happening here with regards to the HBCUs, the 2 best HBCUs, as Shirlithia said in her remarks. Thank you all. Thank you for giving that overview and introducing yourselves. Let's dive right in. You know, there are questions that are coming through the chat. You know, one that often happens is people will reach out and they say, well, how do I know it's the right time? Like we talk about being early in your career, showing great leadership skills, and the skills that are needed to succeed at the highest levels of government. What kind of things did you think about in preparing for and deciding when to apply for the White House Fellowship Program? And I'll turn to any of you who wants to jump in and answer.
I'll try. So I didn't say before, I was a management consultant before, and I would say that for me, there was a natural rhythm. It just so happens that I was with the firm. I had a special expertise. I had worked in consumer products marketing. I had worked at Procter & Gamble before becoming a consultant. And it just so happens that that summer, the summer before I applied, I had been on what they call on the beach. And that's because I was being held over for a specific project for a specific client where the executives wanted me to lead the project. And so every week the agreement wasn't signed. So I literally was in DC at home for about 12 weeks, which has never happened. And so during that period, I had a chance to have lunch, informational lunches about different things. And at the time, there was a fellow who was at the Justice Department that I was introduced to, and he encouraged me to apply. And so it was just a result of having been in consulting for a while. I had a break to actually think more broadly about things. I had some time to actually reach out to recommenders, to start on the application, and just be thoughtful about how it might impact my career and what I might want to do with it. And so I think there's no perfect time because back at the firm, they were not very supportive initially. It was in their interest to keep me there, and they were discouraging me. But as I proceeded through the process and was successful, I realized that it was a great opportunity and that there was no way that I would not pursue it if given the chance. And that's how it unfolded. So,
great, thanks, Liz.
I'll chime in because I had a pretty unconventional introduction to the White House Fellows Program, and I'll spare all the details. But back in 2012, so I didn't know anything about the White House Fellowship Program. You know, you guys are so many steps ahead just by joining this webinar, honestly. And I was coming to my law firm one day and I saw a sign that said Austin and Byrd welcomes the Regional White House Fellows Program. That was my only knowledge of the program, seeing that sign. And I ran into one of my friends who had clerked for my judge the year before me. I literally bumped into him in Starbucks and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Oh, I'm a regional finalist for the fellowship program." I said, "Well, it has the word White House in it. It's a fellowship. It sounds amazing. Good luck." And, you know, 2 years passed after that, and I'll share quickly just a bit of a personal story, but 2 years passed and I was having a great time at the firm, but I had a very dramatic, I think, personal life event that pretty much compelled me to think about my life in a different perspective, and how was I supposed to be using my time here on this earth. And you know, I was 28 years old, thinking that I had everything that I could possibly have as a, you know, trying to be a superstar lawyer at this big firm. And, you know, to a little girl from Mississippi, that was a huge deal, right? Being the only lawyer from my entire hometown in my generation. And so I carried the weight of those 2,000 people from Shaw with me everywhere I went, and always feeling this need to kind of prove, right? And to do more. And all of that weight ultimately manifested itself in a cancer journey at the age of 28. And I went through a full year of treatment. And I'm telling you this story because I wouldn't be here on this panel without that story and that moment in my life. And so after getting back to the firm from this year of treatment, I found myself getting back in the same rhythm, working at 3, 4 in the morning, coming back and doing it again. And one day at midnight, I just stopped and I said, okay, I can't do the same thing, right? I can't go through that journey and come back and be the same. Then I've missed the point. And I literally said, I looked up and I said, just tell me what was all of that for, right? I feel like I'm being called for something, but I don't know what that is. And as clear as I'm speaking to you all, I wish I could make this up. There was this thought, this voice in my head that said, look up the White House Fellowship. And I remember looking it up and said, oh my goodness, that's the same sign I saw in 2010. And then I read everybody's bios and then I said, okay, clearly I'm being punked. I don't know if Ashton Kutcher is in my head, but this is nothing I would ever remotely be qualified for. And, you know, my next thought was, after the journey you just went through, what do you have to lose? No is the easiest word you can ever hear after that journey. And so you have to go for it. And literally after hearing a voice and being obedient to that voice and what I felt was some calling for a bigger purpose in my life, I decided to apply for the program. The irony is I heard that voice on October 31st, 2012. The application was coming out the very next day on November 1st. And so I didn't know where the journey would end, but I knew that I had to follow that voice. And so I tell you that story because you don't have to have known, you know, about this program for 10 years. You don't have to prepare for it and build your resume for it. You should absolutely apply with just being you, right? And everything that you have within you, you're already prepared just by being on this call. And so there's no set path. And if I can, you know, this girl from Shaw, Mississippi can now be here as a former White House fellow and having applied after hearing a voice, any of you absolutely can do it.
Nadine, I just want to jump in with like one other perspective. So similar to Charlicia, as a woman of faith, I feel like you just know when it's your right time. You'll get that prompt. But I often get this question of like, when should I apply? I look at it two ways. So the fellowship is places people in very senior roles. Your principal may be literally the Secretary of Labor or 1 or 2 positions removed from the president. And so I think it's critically important for you to reflect on, am I at that leadership place and can I walk into a room and influence this person and have the gravitas to be able to drive decision making? And so some of it I think is a little bit of a personal reflection of where you are in your leadership journey. And then the other thing I would think about is some people use the fellowship as transitions. If you're looking to transition to another career or into a new area, it's a really great inflection point from that standpoint. You may be placed in the area where you're from. So I'm in education. If you find yourself maybe struggling to come up with the stories that like your leadership story, community service story, it may mean you may need to take a little more time to kind of build in those areas so you're the most competitive when you apply.
Great. Thank you all. Eric, would you like to jump in too?
Yeah, I'll just say I think like Lewis, I was doing a management consultant at the time, and I was focusing on public sector stuff and policy. And the fellowship was a way to be able to see how policy gets made and learn from the people who are making the decisions that will impact generations. And so for me, that was a natural time to apply, just because professionally it was a good place. And I was at about the age where, you know, as Crystal has pointed out, you know, I felt like I was in a place to where I could both learn and contribute. So it you know, a lot of different factors, and it's very personal for each person. And I just want to echo what Sharithia said. You know, when I submitted my application, I didn't know if I was going to be competitive. I remember riding the train coming from DC, actually on a project, going back home to New Jersey. And I was talking to a former fellow, and he's like, yeah, they're going to want to talk to you. So you've submitted your application, they're going to want to talk to you. And at the time, I remember thinking, really? He's like, yeah, they're going to want to talk to you. And you know, it ended up eventually working out. And so I agree with everything that's been said. If you feel like it's the right time, do it. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you all just for sharing your stories and your perspectives and what brought you to applying for the fellowship. You know, we talk about skills, and sometimes we hear from people who say, I want to work on this policy, or I want to work in this department, and what makes for a successful White House fellow. When you think about those skills, leadership skills, and the skills that you'll need in the work assignments, can you share some examples of what are those skills that we're looking for that we think will make a successful White House fellow candidate?
I wanted to respond to something that you said before that. You talked about, you know, you come in with a specific idea and you want to work in this department. Like, scratch that. I mean, you know, I think anyone who comes in with an idea or a notion about where they might want to go and what policy initiative they may want to work on. And there is a chance if you have a certain thing in your background, but ultimately, I think your posture should be open. Your posture should be, this is one of where I'm going to allow kind of the universe, as well as you do have some input in it, but to not, because there will be things that you don't know. And so for me personally, you know, I had worked in, as I said, brand advertising, consulting space. And I really thought, because of the media things that I had been touching, that I wanted to go work for the FCC. And at the time, Reed Hunt was there, and they were selling all this Spectrum, and they were doing all this cool stuff. And so I was like, I want to go to the FCC. And lo and behold, what they wanted their fellow to do was something very different. I had a colleague that went there and did something great, but there was also a new director coming into the OMB that had not been confirmed. And that was Frank Raines, who went on to be the CEO of Fannie Mae. Well, the deputy director who was acting at the time was Jack Lew, who went on during Obama to become the Secretary of the Treasury. Well, during my interview, he was the deputy. He and I kind of connected, and they made a push for me to come to OMB. Now, I could have never in a million years projected that one of the areas of focus would be the District of Columbia, and really trying to literally fix the structural impediments for the city to be successful, giving its quasi-state, quasi-city status since home rule. And so that's why I say you got to be open, you got to be flexible, you got to be nimble. And I think from what are the skills? Being inquisitive, it's not about you. So if you can check your ego at the door, because most people want to come in and sit next to and be next to the principal. And at the end of the day, yes, there'll be opportunities for that. But if your objective is FaceTime with a certain person or a celebrity cabinet member or something like that, then this may not even be the program for you. But if you are here for a real experience to learn how government and policy works, what I didn't say is I learned about the program as a student at Harvard Business School, going through the recruiting process. They actually had a team that came on campus just as other employees came on campus. And I probably saw it my first year, and I was intrigued. I ended up having an interest in the public sector. I had taken joint courses with the Kennedy School while I was there. I had done a field study for a senator during my second year. And so while I was in business, I always had an interest in this public sector nonprofit mix. And so that was kind of the path. And that's why the fellow was always kind of in my sights. But as with Shalithia, I would get the application every year and I'd look at it and look at these profiles and say, no, I can't measure up to this. And then finally that lunch I told you about during the period that I had a break to really think, this guy just, as Eric says, like, look, no, you should do it. You really should apply. I know fellows, you are in the consideration set. And so that's it.
No, Louis, you hit on some excellent points, which hopefully you all are hearing, and that was a prompt, which is to have flexibility because you may have expertise and training in a particular area, but be placed in an agency that is actually completely different from your area of expertise. You may come with a training in education and be placed in the Department of Transportation. And remembering that the focus of this fellowship is about leadership and public service and learning those very critical skill sets that Louis just described, and seeing how that can be very transformational to you understanding government and how it works really at the highest levels. Thank you, Louis, for that. I think there was someone else who wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, and Nadine, you teed it up perfectly, because the one thing that I just want to emphasize for everybody is that your placement, your 9-to-5 job is not the best part of the fellowship. It's not even close. All the stuff that you do after work, either with your class or the speaker series or the traveling that you do, that's the stuff that the vast majority of fellows remember. If you're lucky enough to have a placement that just resonates, either because that's what you wanted to do or because you learned something that you didn't expect, that's great. But even if you just took the whole 9-to-5 out and you went and just sat in the park, the fellowship would still be awesome. And so I just really want to emphasize that you're going to learn a lot in the 9-to-5 in your placement, which is an important part of it, but that's not the most important part of the fellowship.
Nadine, can I jump in here? Because we also got a question in the chat about how did HBCUs prepare you for the fellowship? And I think that dovetails nicely with your question about skills. And, of course, you have to have the hard skills, right? You need to have the work ethic. You need to be good at your craft. You need to have take the initiative, be a leader. But I must say, and I believe this at my core, the fact that HU, and I don't know if everyone on the phone has gone to an HBCU, but the fact that you have already gives you the skills that you need. And I say that because we focus so much on the hard skills. It is absolutely the soft skills that will propel you so far in the interview process, right? And your actual placement, that those skills that I feel like only, my HBCUs could have instilled in me, outside of my grandmother, who said from day one, know who you are and know whose you are, right? So but just the level of self-confidence and self-awareness, this undeniable understanding of who you are at your core is everything that the fellowship is about, right? You can't present someone that you're not. And the one thing that HBCUs teach us is that you matter, right? You have a voice and you should use that voice. It doesn't matter if you're in the room with the President of the United States of the entire America, or if you're in the room with the person who's delivering your mail. You have the ability to adapt and adjust because, of that nurturing foundation that we all got at an HBCU. And I would venture to say that for me, those soft skills, that the sense of self, is probably the most important skill that you can have, and certainly the most important one to get you through that application and the interview process, because they want to see you. And they can figure out, I mean, if you've applied and made it to regionals and nationals, they know you're smart, they know you're capable, right? So you need to show them something else that's within you that only you have.
Excellent feedback. So there's also some questions in the chat with regards to the components of the program, like we've talked about, and you all have done a really great job in talking about the placement experiences of working in specific agencies. There's also the education program and as well as the policy experiences, the policy trips. Can someone talk about those other components as well as the community service, the other components of the fellowship, and maybe some highlights from your fellowship year that touch upon those other elements of the program itself?
I'll be super quick on that since I had teed it up. You know, the educational part, as they call it, is, as we call it, is you get a chance to meet with speakers who come. Sometimes it's, you know, 1 or 2 a week, and you get to meet with them and have a candid conversation. So these could be cabinet secretaries, they could be industry leaders. Usually you're going to meet with the president, the vice president, the chair of the Joint Chiefs. You know, for our year, we met with Bob Woodward, who broke the Watergate scandal. And so we got to hear firsthand about what that was like for the person who saw it up close. We got to meet with Joe Biden when he was vice president and changed my whole perspective about politics and about specific politicians about whom I had very strong, and I would admit, very negative views of. These are people that he worked with and knew for decades and was able to give just stories that we would never know because it's not what's in the headlines. And one other thing which I'll leave with is we got a chance to sit in the meeting of a major network where they were deciding what was going to be broadcast on the news the next day. So most of the time we just consume whatever, the networks put up, but there are individuals who make decisions about that. And we got a chance to see how that process goes. And it's stuff like that, landing on the deck of an aircraft carrier, right? Drinking, white liquor with Chinese officials in a small rural town outside of Shanghai, right? Like, these are the kinds of things that really make it special. Going on a tour of a textile plant, in the garment district in New York, like, who does that? And so those are the things that you really remember, which make it special.
Thank you, Eric. Something that we also talk about as alumni of the program is the relationship with our class, right? Our fellows, and how that's one of the most special things and most unique things of the program. Crystal, can you talk maybe about your fellowship, your cohort, and the impact of your classmates on the fellowship experience and beyond?
Yeah, really quick, I just want to piggyback on what Eric said. He mentioned that the placement, your work experience, that's one component, but the overall global experience of the fellowship cannot be underestimated. You have an international policy trip. I went to Japan, Hawaii, where we had the opportunity to meet with everyone almost up to the deputy prime minister there. You have a domestic trip. So we went to New York and got to meet with senior leaders there. We went to Sunnylands and got communication training. So we all went through extensive communication and leadership training. Sunnylands is the place where presidents go prior to the administration to get communication training. So it's an entire leadership journey. I think the placement is one component, what you're working on, but the bigger component is the conversations you're having with leaders every Tuesday and Thursday, the events, the community service aspect, because truly, this is a service-based fellowship. We come to serve, and so even the community service is a big part of it. But the fellowship cohort experience, it was amazing. I had everyone in my class, from doctors, former Teach for America, people who worked at Google and created Google Maps. And so it was just a variety of people from different walks of life. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that there was roughly 50% of my class were service members, so those who were in the military prior to the fellowship. And as someone who did not grow up in a family where there was people in the military, it was just really great for me to really understand their journey and what it truly means to serve the country from someone being in service. Our class is still extremely close. We talk on GroupMe almost every single day. We talk about things that are going on in this country. But more so, like, we've become close as people. We meet and pray almost once a quarter. We are there for the good times, the bad times. But I think the biggest thing is that we are all committed to public service and being a part of each person's journey on the way. And so you can't really underestimate just being part of a cohort of people who care just as much about this country as you do.
Thank you, Crystal. Others who'd like to weigh in about highlights from your fellowship experience that I haven't gotten up to.
Okay, one very last thing. I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna be quiet. One thing which we also got to do as a class was we walked on the Great Wall of China. And that comes to mind specifically because that may actually, I got a chance to take a picture with this shirt on the Great Wall, and I was very proud of that. And actually, I still have that, and so it just brings back good memories. And so I'm gonna stop because I think Charlethea, you were about to say something.
Charlethea, were you gonna chime in here?
Well, the fact that Eric can still fit that Morehouse sweater is impressive in this COVID world. So I'm impressed by that. No, I was just gonna chime in. You asked about the class. I just think that's probably one of the best components of the program. I learned just as much from my class members than I did, from the principals with whom I worked. And so it's so important that you take the time to cultivate those relationships, because those are the people who will be your friends forever. And, you saw the video with what these folks end up doing after the fellowship, and even beyond that, just establishing that sense of community with your classmates is very important. And of course, you have the highlights that I think Eric talked about. You get to meet the President of the United States, right? You get to sit in a room with the President for at least an hour and ask whatever questions you want to ask, and to just soak in all of that knowledge and wisdom, and to be in the sheer presence of those types of people. I just think it is, we talk about it as once in a lifetime experience, and it really was. And it's just an amazing program, and we would be happy to chat with you all after this and give more insight too.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I wanted to just make sure folks understood what we were saying, because we're kind of talking about it. So there are maybe 4 components to the program. There's your job assignment, where you typically work for a principal that's a cabinet level officer, and you have a project or a few projects, and you shadow them in some cases, or you might go to meetings. Second, you have the education program, which is run out of the fellows office, which happens to be on the grounds of Lafayette Park, or at least it was when I was there. And so you're going to Lafayette Park twice a week, 3 times a week for these sessions. And these sessions, as Eric and Charlethea alluded to, might have folks that are from the administration, but they might be senior policy leaders who work for nonprofits or corporate leaders. Our year, we met with everyone from Marion Barry to Colin Powell. Colin Powell is probably one of our most prominent former fellows. As a result of that meeting, I talked to him briefly on the side afterwards. And he, at the time, was on the board of Howard, and he was the chair of the Academic Affairs Committee on the board of Howard. I was so heady at 30-something years old, and I thought I could be the head of development at Howard. And I pitched him on that and wrote him a white paper. And as a result, he channeled it to the president of Howard. And while I wasn't able to become the head of development because I don't have this gray hair that I didn't have the gray hair that I have now, they did make me his chief of staff. And so perhaps one of the most amazing, rewarding experiences came directly, well, not directly, because I went back to consulting for a while, but not long after that, I became the chief of staff to the president of my alma mater. And it was a result of my relationship directly that I had made with General Powell, or now Secretary Powell, at the conclusion of our fellowship year. Beyond that, we have domestic policy trips, we have military trips, and then we also have the global trip, which I talked about before. And during our year, it was on a diplomatic passport, where we met with Grace Michelle, who was Nelson Mandela's wife at the time of his death. We met with F.W. de Klerk, Bishop Desmond Tutu. We went to Mozambique, we did safari, and this, at the time, it was 2 to 3 weeks. And so, the fullness of the program and the things that you're able to do, Eric talked about landing, and he kind of abbreviated it, literally tail hooking onto an aircraft carrier. Like, when in your life are you gonna have an opportunity to tail hook into an aircraft carrier? And I think that's something that has happened consistently throughout the years. And the last thing I will say is about the fellows. The one thing I think is consistent for folks who attend HBCUs is the camaraderie that you're able to develop and the networks that you have that allow you to go to almost any city in the world and instantly have, you know, an inn where you know and you can talk and you can and you can kind of rely on that bond that whether you know them very well or not, or they're one or two people removed. Well, the same thing happens with the fellows program. And so we had 18 people our year. I think some people in the chat asked about that. Our year was the first year that had more women than men. So we had 10 women. And they've come from all walks of life. I mean, and you learn so many things. And the last thing I'll say is one of the women in our class was the first female firefighter in New York City. I mean, like, I cannot express to you the hidden gems like sprinkled throughout this experience.
Let me check in real quick with David Moore just to see if we have other questions that seem to be recurring questions in the chat that would be beneficial for us to answer, for our panelists to answer. David, do you have some additional questions that you're seeing as some recurring themes that our attendees have?
Thanks, Nadine. I've tried to answer them as fast as I can type. What I would say in general is that many of the questions that I've seen posed tonight are addressed on our website. This is the Alumni organization website, whff.org. If you look there on the section on the fellows, on how to apply to the program, we have detailed descriptions about the interview process, about the application, about the placements. So many of the questions that I've seen this evening, I think you can find addressed there. And by the way, Lewis, it's been way too long, man.
So to the audience, David and Lewis are our classmates. So as you can see, all right. Sharlithia, you were going to chime in, please.
Yeah, I'm got just one more point, and I promise I'll be quiet for the night. You know, I think what we've talked about so far is what you can get out of the program. Folks have talked about the educational program. Folks have talked about the placement and these amazing trips and climbing the Great Wall of China. But the one thing I don't want it to be lost on you that is that you also need to think about what you will bring to the program, right? The video started talking about the notion of public service, and the people who tend to apply for this program are committed to service. And so think about that through that lens, like what can you bring to the program, and not just, you know, during the interview process, but also during your placements, because you're going to be bringing a diversity of experiences, a diverse set of backgrounds to help solve really some big problems. And just one quick example, and I promise I'm done, but, you know, I was in Eric Holder's office. I joined his staff maybe 3 days before Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. And the day he was killed, we got a call from the president, Barack Obama, saying, all right, what are you going to do about this? And I was in that meeting, the only person in that meeting who looked like me, the only person in that meeting who had the benefit of my background, right? Both from where I'm from and this permanent uniform that I wear as a Black woman. And I raised my hand to give a suggestion because I thought people were just getting it wrong. And Eric Holder looked at me, and I'll never forget this. And he said, all right, you lead it. You're going to lead this for us. And for the next 3 years, I led policing for the Department of Justice. So every shooting, and there were quite a few, right? Officer involved shootings between 2014 and 2017, January 2017, I had to help figure out with our Civil Rights Division, with our Community-Oriented Policing Services Office, what do we do about this? How do we solve this problem of police brutality? And it was because I wasn't afraid to speak up, right? I used my background to say, no, we need to think about this another way. So when you think about what you can bring to the program and what you can bring to your placements, I guarantee you will get so much more out of it than you'd ever imagine.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, I'm really glad that you raised that point, Sharlithia, because as HBCU graduates, you know, we're growing our alumni and alumni network within for HBCU graduates, right? There's not as many of us as there will be going forward. And because of who you are, in the same way that Shalithia brought a perspective as a Black woman from an HBCU, from the South, right? Like all of that it comes into who you are as a person. And each class is not just a collection of individuals. It's built and put together so that everybody can learn from each other and contribute. So as HBCU graduates with your particular constellation of awesomeness, the program needs you to apply. The program needs you to be in the class because you bring a perspective that nobody else has that's going to be important for the future of our country. And so if we can't emphasize it enough, you get so much from it, but because of who you are, you actually make the program and you make our country better by being a part of it. And so Shalithia, I'm really glad that you shared that story, because that is exactly how it happens. The right person in the right room at the right time with the right set of circumstances can change the course of an administration and change the course of history.
Thank you. That was powerful, Eric. Thank you both to you and Shalithia. Crystal, you had another comment, and then we're going to turn it back over to Margarita.
Really quickly, because I'm looking at the chat. So both Eric and Shalithia is like, please apply, 100% agree. Your voice is needed. It's intimidating, but just apply. But a lot of people are asking, like, what makes for a successful application? So I just want to hit on that quickly. So the application is made up of recommendations. My just high level advice there is ensure you have diversified recommenders who can speak to kind of all parts of your life, whether that is undergrad, work experience, community service. So just think about pulling people in from different areas of your life. The essays, I think you should really like try to distill all of your stories and make sure, if you can, incorporate different parts of your story in your essay. So just try to ensure in each essay you are being able to tell a different part of yourself, but at the same time kind of have that throughput. There's some other areas like decorations, personal information, keep it sharp, keep it crisp, and just make sure you're telling the best story of yourself. After you apply, if you move forward, you would go on to regionals. At regionals, they're roughly, I don't want to misquote, but 8 or 9 different regionals across the country. I went through the Southeast region in Dallas. There are interviews there. And then if you move forward there, you go to nationals, where it's roughly 30 people you are interviewing with throughout the fellowship. So I know we're not going to get to all the questions, but I think we're going to follow up with Q&A afterwards. So hopefully we can get to everything there.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Crystal, for that overview of the process. Many thanks to all of our panelists, to Louis, to Shalithia, Eric, and Crystal, just really bringing forward such a diverse perspective of the experiences in the program and the impacts that it's had, certainly in their journeys. I want to turn it back over now to Margarita to close us out.
Margarita, you're on mute.
Thank you. All right, so what I wanted to say is that we can stay a little bit over time if there are questions that are not yet answered, to finish those out. That was a great panel. I want to share with you, even though I was in a totally different class from the alumni that you've heard from tonight, I connected to their stories as well. And what do I mean by that? You know, Louis shared with you that he ended up working on his hometown. And in my case, my hometown is Sacramento, but at the time that I was selected, I was living in Los Angeles, and I had already been there 3 or 4 years. And little did I know that my assignment at the US Department of Education was going to bring me back to Los Angeles. And it did, because the year that I applied, Rodney King happened. And I was in the Ukraine at that moment in time when the reports were coming over the radio, because that's all we had access to. We were all sitting like on the floor of the hotel lobby. And I remember feeling just so helpless at that time, you know, and just wondering, you know, why are we here? You know, we should be back over there. And when I came back to the US, my principal, David Kearns, was named one of the co-chairs of the economic recovery effort for Los Angeles. So who would have known? You know, I think one thing that maybe you heard from these stories today is that sometimes you end up with the front row to history. That's been another description of this program. You never know what's going to land on your plate the year that you serve as a White House Fellow. But definitely what we all have in common is that desire to help and serve and bring our experience, our personal experience to the table, thereby enriching the program. So what I want to say in closing is that if there's still questions that you have not heard answered tonight, this is the email you want to write to. And if you cannot find the answers to your questions on our website, which is whff.org, or the official White House site, then please write to us at this email address. We also, if anyone's out there listening who thinks they know of a candidate who they would like to recommend, this is also the email that you can connect with us. So again, thank you to all of you. Before we leave though, Nadine, I wanna say thank you to you, because Nadine, not only is she a high-level executive, but she also leads on behalf of the foundation, the WHFFA, the outreach to the African-American community. We all do this as volunteers. So this whole webinar tonight are the efforts that Crystal leads, the outreach to women for us. So we want to thank, just all of you alumni who have taken the time to get involved tonight, to share really your incomparable stories, because you're not going to hear about these stories on our website. And that was really the purpose of our webinar tonight, is for you to learn things that you can't find elsewhere. So with that said, thank you so much for being here. Do we want to stay on a little? Are there other questions that we want to answer?
One question in the chat that I thought it might be helpful that I observed, and that is, and I can't speak to it until maybe Nadine or David can speak to it, or you, Margarita. How has the fellowship been affected by COVID? Have there been any components that have been or had to have been changed? So I thought it would be important and timely relevant to talk about that.
David, is that a question you can help? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So last March, actually last February, the class of fellows was planning to go on a trip to Japan. They had actually been invited by the government of Japan to travel there, and they had another trip planned later in the year to go to Europe. This was right at the time when we were hearing the first elements of, COVID, the first cases occurring, and they made the decision not to go on the trip out of concern that they might go overseas and get stuck and be unable to get back into the States, or even worse, the people might get sick and then come back sick and, of course, interact with people all across the executive branch of government. And so they decided to postpone the trip. Initially, they thought it was just going to be postponing it. And then when the pandemic hit in full swing in mid-March, they went to a virtual education program. And some of the placements, if a particular agency was working virtually, then the fellows themselves would often work virtually. But then in other cases, they continued working in person. I know Amit Sachev at HHS would go in, and he and the secretary were the only people in the office. Everyone who was on the White House campus itself, they tended to work in person. So last year's class, the final portion from March through the end of the year, they had to balance a lot of remote educational experiences and remote work for their placements. This year, as the fellowship began, some of the interviews during placement week, for example, were done virtually, and they're doing a mix. Sometimes they're meeting with speakers virtually, sometimes they're meeting in person. They're not meeting right now in Jackson Place in the fellow's office, just because it's a fairly small confined space. They go over to a big conference room in the White House, and that's where they tend to meet with their speakers. So yes, it has affected, and I think the effects now are gradually subsiding with the current class. And so by the end of the year, we hope things will be back completely to normal. I know they all had to go get a COVID test before they went in to meet with the president last week and that sort of thing.
One, I hate to be the monitor of the chat, but there was one other that I thought was interesting, and that was someone wanted to know, and because I know there are so many people who are in entertainment, that they want to know if anyone from entertainment would be accepted into the fellowship, because they noticed that there's not an option to indicate that field of expertise, I guess, on the application.
Just explain it in the essays or in free text, I would say. Absolutely. We've had prima ballerinas. We had actually Michelle Kwan, the Olympic gold medalist. She actually made it to nationals, was not selected, but her husband, actually who she met it.
Clay Pell, yeah.
Clay actually became a fellow, so
yeah.
Michelle is still connected to the program. But we absolutely want artists of every discipline to consider applying. And actually, I think given the current effect of the pandemic on the arts, this is a perfect time to apply.
David, there are questions too, which you might have touched on some with regards to the relocation, where fellows who are not in the DC area. Can you talk a little bit more too about the fellowship year and the expectations for the year?
So it is necessary to move to Washington, DC. The decision about whether to move as a family or just as an individual, that's something that each person selected as a fellow makes. I was at the Pentagon when I was selected, and so I didn't have to relocate. But Louis, I think you did, as I recall, didn't you?
No, I was in DC.
No, you were in DC. That's right. You went to New York later. But so you have to move to Washington, DC, and while they don't pay a moving allowance, the fellowship is a paid position. If you Google GS 14 Step 3, you'll see what the pay rate is.
There was another question about networking beyond the fellowship. And I think because you're there, David, and I think everyone can speak to, there is a very rich network and opportunities with the White House Fellows annual meetings that occur every October or have occurred every October. And I'll let someone else talk about it, but I want to just tee it up so someone could explain it.
Well, I would say we work to stay connected all the time. I mean, and that's both in small groups within our classes, but it's also, when I went up to New York last year, Louis and I and Brenda and Stephanie all got together for dinner, and so you'll meet and stay connected with your fellows, the fellows in your class, but then as an alumni organization, the 760 living White House Fellows get together both annually in Washington, D.C., as well as at regional conferences and on occasion for overseas travel. So we look for every opportunity to get together if we can.
And
I
actually,
saw
no, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Eric. Go.
Yeah, I mean, no, if you were gonna, if you had something on this one, then go ahead. Okay, so yeah, just to piggyback on what you were saying, David, oftentimes you're very close with the folks in your class. Like, as has been said before, I've gotten, WhatsApp notices this morning from two of my classmates who just published an article and they were sharing it, right? And so so there's that. But then also you meet people across classes too. In my case, I had the opportunity, the application process was such an enthralling experience. I actually decided to do it twice. So I actually made friends in multiple classes, and so that I'm still good friends with too. And then there are folks who will come after you who you become good friends with as well. And so I had a friend of mine from two classes behind who just happened to be in New Orleans. This was just before COVID. And, so we got a chance to hang out, and he's a dear friend. I've met his kids and been to it, and everything. And so it's tight in your class, but it's tight across.
And just before I turn to Crystal too, Eric just touched on a point, which is there are fellows who have applied to the fellowship program more than once. And you can imagine just thinking about this program and selecting 11 to 19 individuals for a class. It is not an indication that you are not a competitive and highly qualified candidate. It's that it's 11 to 19 people in the nation serving as a White House Fellow. And so there are fellows who have applied more than once to the program.
Yeah, and in most classes, there's someone who is a second timer, as they would say. And as Nadine pointed out, a lot of times it's not about an individual, it's about the makeup of the class for that year in with that commission, with that group of applicants. And so a lot of times, you would ask, well, what was it? And he was like, well, it was nothing. It was just again and again, and it was good.
And Crystal, you had a placement contribution you wanted to discuss?
I'm looking at the chat and there are a lot of questions around placement. So I was hoping to provide some clarity there. So there are a lot of questions around like, how can I influence or determine what my placement will be? So when you're selected after nationals, there's what's called a placement week. And so prior to that placement week, you'll have the opportunity to kind of list where you would like to be placed. And fellows can be placed in any federal department, agency, and several of the fellows are placed directly in the White House. So it's kind of like if you went to medical school, it's a matchmaking process. You list kind of agencies or where you would like to be placed. And then the principals get a list of all of the resumes, and then they select people that they would like to interview. So it's essentially a week of like you hopping all over town, going in and out of cabs, meeting with the principals, telling your story, hearing what their placement process, or hearing what the opportunity is there to do the placement. And then ultimately on the back end, there's a matchmaking process where typically I think it aligns with where you would like to be, but there's a matchmaking process. And I think as people have alluded to, you can come in saying, I'm in the education space. So I rank the Department of Education lower because I want to try to do something a little differently. Yeah. Everybody has their own kind of opinion on what they want their placement to look like. And then the other question that came through is there opportunity to do 2 placements. So you're placed in one role. However, sometimes you see like principal changes, people who start in administration, they may transition out. So you may end up getting 2 placements, but ideally or likely you'll be in 1 placement. My principal transitioned halfway through my fellowship. So the first part of my fellowship was in the Domestic Policy Council, working on the President's Initiative on HBCUs. And then the second half, I spent time at USDA working on their minority higher education program. So sometimes there are those opportunities, but I'll just wrap it up and say, even in your placement, you're doing a lot of cross-agency work. So I think Charlethea mentioned this, you may be in the Department of Justice, but you're reaching out to other agencies as part of your work. So there's an opportunity to just get a viewpoint from all the different agencies.
Charlethea, I'm going to cover a couple of questions too.
Sure. I saw a couple of questions about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and how does that factor into the composition of the program? And David, you may want to chime in on that too. I will say that it's much less of a factor in terms of, oh, we need a certain number of, right, X category. And it's more so we need to build the best class of individuals, right, that make the best cohort. And we need to make sure that it is a representative class. And the good thing about having David and Margarita in the roles that they're in is they are looking at, you know, these classes with that in mind, making sure there's a lot of emphasis now on making sure the federal government looks like America. And I am sure that that permeates through the fellowship program itself. And so I will encourage all of you to apply. I'll never forget, I got to national, and there may have been 4 or 5 African-American candidates out of 30. And one of the guys came up to me and he said, okay, I have a plan. There are 5 of us here. They're probably only going to take 1 or 2. So these people are my competition. No, like you cannot game it like that. I mean, you know, I'm the least strategic person in that way. And so you can't think of it. It's like, oh, there are 4 Black people. They're only going to take 1. No, you show up as you. Show up and do your best and let the rest take care of itself. There's no real strategy to this other than showing up and being the best you can be and let everything else take care of itself. And there certainly is an emphasis on diversity because we're doing this webinar here. We need you all to apply. Krista and I are trying to figure out the number of HBCU grads. There are certainly less than 10 over the past 10 years, and we can do better. And so that's why we're having this call today. We need you to apply. We need you to encourage your friends to apply. And as Margarita said, it is nonpartisan. It's not about, you know, who's in office, but it's about the experience that you can both gain and bring. And so just bring all of you and please apply.
Yeah, so Charlethea, one point of clarification there. Margarita and I are not part of the selection process. We are part of the recruiting effort. So
yes, you're bringing us all to the table to then make it.
Exactly. So the commission, so to be clear, the people who select the fellows are the President's Commission on White House Fellowships. They are appointed by the President. And so different administrations will place different emphasis on issues that they feel are important. So while I would agree with, your perspective, Alethea, on all of that, I just want to make the point, we're the alumni. We're not the people selecting the fellows. That's the President's Commission, the government officials.
Speaking of that, David and Nadine, there was a question in the chat about the interview process.
I think, Crystal, did you say, because you had just teased, I think you had said something in the chat that you wanted to hop in.
Yeah, and it's same Lewis comment as well. I just want to make sure people really heard Charlethea around the comparison point. You do see that it's like, well, it's going to be one African-American woman selected, one African-American one, and that's totally not the case. And I think people said, what's the biggest thing you can do to be successful is staying in your own lane. Yeah. What is your story? Charlethea's story is I grew up in Shaw, Mississippi with one stoplight, right? She can only tell that story in her own way, right? I can only tell my story. The moment you get in a comparison point, which I did in my first few interviews, and I had to go to the bathroom and have a come to Jesus moment, you have to stay in your own lane, in your essays, in the interviews, all that good stuff. And then there's like—
and actually, I just want to echo that again, just to put a double underline under it. The single biggest thing about being selected is showing up as your best prepared and informed and natural self. The process is too long and it's too intense for you to try and fake it. It doesn't work. And the commission, that's what they do. For most of us, we've done, going through the process, it's either 12 or 14 interviews over a period, when you add it up, of 4.5 days. You can't fake it for that long. Be your best self, and that's your best way to get in.
And I want to add to that, because there's a lot of questions about the application and what should it look like in the interviews. And what I will say is, well, first of all, alums in the past have had a chance to do a first review. And the one thing that I have observed, and I think when there's an application that's strong, because in the past we'll have a thing called a reading weekend where alums are reading, and you'll see applications passed around, and you'll see strong. And what's strong is consistency. And that is when Eric says, be yourself, if you're being someone else, your references, your academic record, what you've written about, what you're interested in, if it's not tied together where it's consistent and tells a story about you that is reinforcing, then you're not showing up as yourself. That's the only thing that matters, is that your narrative about who you are. I, at the time, was looking to, my kind of brand in this was being like this socially responsible executive. I was a business guy, Harvard Business School, and had worked on Wall Street, but at the same time, I had nuggets throughout where I had, while at Harvard, was taking classes in public service and government just to learn, and that I did a field study. But that wasn't even the most important part. The other part was that what I did outside of work from a service standpoint, that I showed that I had commitment to something larger than myself for my own career, in spite of being very challenged and pulled by my career. I still had time to take a leadership role in nonprofit causes. And so being able to tell a story about being interested in something beyond yourself, this is about what are you going to contribute? And it's not about coming to Washington. This program is about going back from Washington and going back to your communities. If you read about John Gardner, this is about having a force multiplier effect of people that are interested in their communities and serving their communities in an in-depth way. And so even beyond the fellowship, I'm sure if you asked us another question about what we're doing outside of our jobs, I'm the chairman of the board of a nonprofit that helps folks that are incarcerated learn about entrepreneurship, and to get college credit for that outside of my job and all the other things that I'm doing. And I bet you everyone here is doing something like that. And so if you're not committed to contributing to your community and making a difference upon all the issues that our communities face, then this isn't the program for you. But if you are, because that is the common thread beyond for any one of these folks. So race doesn't matter, disability doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter. It is a commitment to our cause as people and the human race. And it sounds sappy and it sounds corny, but that's really what it is.
And so one of the things you're hearing too from all of the panelists is being able to tell your story and being authentic through the application process. That's also true through the fellowship process, through the fellowship year as well, and in your placement and in your policy experiences, and what happens beyond as far as the opportunities you may then have beyond the fellowship. And telling your story is going to be something that you will repeatedly do during the course of your fellowship experience and beyond. And so really being true to who you are and what you bring to the table and what you contribute and what you're passionate about and how you do that is going to be really vital within the fellowship experience. David, there are some questions about federal government experience that are coming through that I think is, we've said in particular that people who are currently working in federal government are not eligible for the fellowship unless they're career military, but there are also questions about transition times of if you've been out of government for a period of time. Could you address that?
Nadine, I just wanted to get in line for after David answers. I'm racked with regret. I interrupted my sister Crystal when she was talking. I got too excited, and so I'm just getting in line for when David finishes answering his questions. So I'm standing in line for you, Crystal, so that you go next. Yes.
So one, the commission is the entity that will decide or adjudicate any questions on federal service. In general, I would say that the program is designed for non-federal employees because it's teaching you about the federal government. And so they don't want to take a career, foreign service officer from the State Department and send them to the White House Fellowship, because many of the things that you would learn in the fellowship are things you would have learned elsewhere in the federal government. I don't know that there's a minimum time you have to be out of a federal government job. That's something that would be determined by the commission. In general, I would say a good rule of thumb would be if you've served in the federal government at some point, but have gone on to another career and have established yourself in some other career field, then I would encourage you to apply. Eric, over to you.
Crystal, you're going to take the next point. Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came in the chat is about the memo to the president. What's the advice there? You see some fellows take the approach of writing about something they know really, really well and going deep. And then you see some fellows who write about something kind of completely different. So they to demonstrate that they have knowledge or can be adaptable to other areas. I think I wrote my memo on the president changing the tax code to pay off student loan debt. I owe Sally a lot of money. But I think everybody has a different approach. Overall, I would just say be very thorough and make sure that whatever you write, you can talk about in the interviews. So it's one thing to put a nice memo on paper, but if you can't back it up, because people will push you really hard on that. And just to do rapid fire for some other questions, can you be placed in a STEM role? Yes, there are people, someone in my class was in the Office of Science and Technology at the White House, so that's an absolute yes. And David, I do think it's worth circling back one more time just around living in DC, will the interviews be in DC, all of that, because there are a lot of questions coming in there. Eric, over.
Yeah, Eric, I know you wanted to jump in here. I'll just say quickly, you must live in the DC area, Northern Virginia, Maryland, in the district, in order to be able to physically be present for your work placement and for the meetings at the White House. So.
Oh yeah, the only point that I was making was that I was standing in line as Crystal's proxy, so that we could make sure that we got back to her point. I didn't actually have one.
I'm sorry.
But since we've been talking about DC, I'll just quickly add. Yeah. Living in DC is great. If you've never done it, it's also a cool part of the experience too. But that wasn't why I was in line. I was in line for Crystal.
David, I'm caught up now. David, I understand.
Could you speak to the regional interview selection? I mean, from the national to the regional, region to
sure.
From
the application to the regional.
From the regional to the national, and explain the dynamic and
sure.
Kind of what that's like. I think someone should speak to that.
But first of all, I would say if you go to WHFF.org, we have a complete written description of this process. So just to touch on a few highlights. If there are, let's say, 500 to 1,000 people who apply in a given year for the application, the written applications are reviewed, and from those, about 100 to 120 people are selected for regional interviews. Those are then selected, set up in different cities around the country, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Dallas, Chicago, Nashville, Boston, Washington, D.C., Miami, Atlanta, I think were the ones last year. And there'll typically be about a dozen or so regional finalists who will come to those cities for a day and a half of interviews. Based on those interviews, about 30 people are selected to go forward to the national round of interviews. The regional interviews typically take place in April. The national interviews typically take place in June. About 30 people, as I said, go to nationals, and from those about, well, you've heard the range, 11 to 19. Lewis and my class was a rather large one, 18. Shirleithia's class was only 12. So, it varies. They select the number of people they think among those finalists will do a good job as White House Fellows. And I would just say, if you're going through that process, remember what they're looking for are people who can serve as special assistants to a senior White House official or a cabinet secretary. They want to make sure that it's somebody who can give good, sound, solid advice and have the maturity to operate at that level.
David, since you talked about the process, I see a few questions about support during the process. Like, will people be able to offer guidance or review essays? And I will say you absolutely should reach out to former fellows to help shepherd you through the process. It can be very daunting, and to have someone who's been through it, the application process, the interview process, and I'll also say it doesn't have to be people who actually became fellows. Like, the fact that they went through, there are folks, I think Nadine mentioned, who have applied and made it to nationals, and for a number of reasons may not have made it into the program, but they absolutely have the same experience that we all had, and going through that pretty grueling application process and the regional interviews. So reach out to folks, and all of us here, the part of this is to give back, and we want to be able to offer what we've learned through this process. I mean, Eric walked me through the process, and I paid it forward and did it for Crystal and others. And now you all see Eric on the call. He's quite fun, but Eric is intense. So just be forewarned. If you reach out, Eric is reading every newspaper that exists and watching every broadcast that exists. So I will say, take a little bit from everyone, but to Nadine's earlier point, at the end of the day, take what's helpful for you, but always be authentic to yourself. And so get guidance, get the advice, but don't try to craft what you think the judges will be looking for, because you can't, you're gonna miss the mark every time you do that. So I just really wanna make sure you reach out to people and allow folks to give you guidance and help walk you through the process, because it's so important. And I'll tell you the best advice, Eric, I love you, and you gave me a lot of great advice, but the best advice I got when Eric was driving me crazy, because I'm never going to make it to this program if I have to watch another broadcast. I'm not doing it. And I talked to a fellow who was in the class right before me, and that call was 2 minutes. I'll never forget it. She said, "Girl, you're doing too much." She said, "You're talking to a lot of people." She said, "Just be you." And I said, "What?" Okay, I could have said, "Really?" But I'll tell you this, I went to a conference the day after that call, and they asked all of us to sit at a table. There were place cards in front of us. They said, "You can't turn it over until we tell you." And Eric, I think I told you the story. And I turned over the place card. They said, "It's going to be your theme for the weekend." It said, "Be you. You are more than enough." And I forgot everything Eric told me after that. I said, "You know what? I can't study me. I know me. And the one thing that no one gave you and they can't take from you is you being unapologetically, authentically you, right? So reach out to people for guidance, take what you need from that, and present your best self. And I promise I am done for the night. So thank you all.
Yeah,
Actually,
the one thing I'll piggyback since I was mentioned by name. The one thing that about which I am quite proud is, and having the opportunity to talk to Shalithia before she was applying, is that I may have been one of the first people who knew for certain that she was going to get selected, and it had nothing to do with The Economist that she was reading, or a PBS that I was telling her to watch, or articles that I was asking her to read. It was literally, the whole process is to get you comfortable enough so that when you sit in the room, that you are who you are. That all of your preparation is for that. Being able to show up as the person that you are, and figuring out how to communicate that in a way that the judges can understand is the single most important thing. You're not going to be able to tell them or game it. It just doesn't work. You got to be you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not comfortable, let me just, I want to, wait, but I don't, because that is good, nice, happy talk, but you put the right spin on it, Eric, and that is, like, a part of preparation is to be comfortable. And if you're not a naturally curious person where you haven't kept up with what's happening in current events, I mean, we're talking about current events and being able to have a point of view on current events. Like, you should have a point of view on current events, and whatever it takes for you to feel comfortable, or for you not to walk into the room and be so obsessed about what current event that they're going to ask you about that you can't focus on telling your story, then that's why you do the preparation. The preparation isn't so you become an expert on this conflict in the Middle East. The preparation is so that you're not obsessed about it, so that when you go in, you can talk about how you want to change the world with literacy in blah, 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 blah.
That's right. And I just want to double underline exactly that. Most of the stuff that you study, they'll never ask you about it. Like, just knowing it and being able to sit in the chair and be like, ask me about foreign policy, I got this, right? Ask me about this deep moral philosophical issue, I got this. Preparation is to get you to the point where you can sit and now let me tell you about my life growing up in South Louisiana with such and such and such.
Right.
Right. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask Crystal to chime in with a comment here.
What I will say is that there were folks that were in our interviewing with us that wanted to see my flashcards, and I shared them.
Crystal, you had a comment too as well.
I was going to say everybody has an Eric story. Eric told me to go read The Economist, the last 10 issues to be successful. But I think Lewis' point is very relevant. Like, do what you need to do to feel comfortable going into those interviews, right? If you need to do that level of preparation, please do it. I don't want us to sugarcoat the interview process. It is hard. It is hard. It is well over 20, 30 interviews, intense, round robins. And so we want you to apply. I hope you're excited. I just want to acknowledge that. Do what was best for you to be successful. And then I just want to offer for us to connect on LinkedIn. I know as you go through the process, you see people who maybe were in the military or whatever they came from, and they knew multiple fellows. They had multiple conversations. And so I just want to make myself a resource, and I'm going to volunteer all the rest of the people on the panel. Please add us on LinkedIn. And I think we would love either independently to chat with you or put you in contact with somebody. But this is
I would make one friendly amendment and ask if you could add me on Facebook. That would be my easiest way for that. I have LinkedIn, but Facebook would be the best way to get me. And I also support Crystal's invitation. Please feel free to reach out.
And I'm gonna, Margarita is gonna also add a comment. I just wanted to reflect on something Lewis actually just said with regards to, the interview process and also what you're able to discuss and being current on current events. My background is in health and I trained as a physician. I now work in policy and advocacy, but in coming as a White House fellow in the White House Fellows interviews, I knew that I could not just only speak about health, that I should not only be aware of what is happening regarding health when there were so many other things happening in the world. And naturally I was already attuned to and interested in, because it's this notion of, are you a global citizen? Are you really thinking about society at large and your contribution that you make? But one of the things the fellowship does is it also stretches you out of your comfort zone to really be able to think about diverse perspectives, pressing specific issues that may then influence how you approach your particular field, your particular work and specialty. And so that notion about the preparation, there is that preparation, but it's also that the understanding that that the vision of the fellowship is that these are individuals who are leaders, who will be leaders in their fields that will contribute to the broader society. And so that's the notion too of having that understanding, but not approaching it like a test that you're trying to just ace a test. That too is what everyone is articulating, that the commissioners really kind of see through and they really want to know you as a person. Margarita, you had a comment you'd like to share?
So on the LinkedIn, as the director of outreach and recruitment, I have the honor of posting all the webinars that we're doing. So if you want to stay in the know, make sure you send me a LinkedIn invite or just look at my post, look at my feed, because I will be announcing other webinars as they happen in the future. As a matter of fact, we're going to have another one tomorrow. So please feel free to send me an invite. Number two, I wanted to share with you something that came up at a previous webinar. We had a commissioner on the line who is one of those folks that selects you. And to this question of preparedness and how much, do you know, he said something, that I thought was quite insightful. He said, as a commissioner, what I was looking for is not so much how a person or what a person said to a question, because bear in mind, the questions can be anything. There are no limits to what the question can be. But he said, I looked for how they answered the question. So that's something to keep in mind. You got to be able to stand on your feet, to answer vigorously, to believe what you're saying. Really, it's again, part of that be yourself. It's what do you believe in and why? What do you care about and why? And the last thing, Nadine, that maybe might be helpful for this group, because it's come up before in other webinars, is some people ask about the age, the age range. So it might be helpful if each of us just go down the line and maybe share like how old were you when you found out, and how old were you when you actually got selected. So that might give some insight to the panel, and I'll start off. I was, as I said, I was working in the private sector, but actually, like Lewis, I was wearing two hats. I was also I was an executive on loan the year I was selected because I was leading a nonprofit. I was exactly 34 years old when I found out. I knew absolutely no alumni, and I got tapped on the shoulder by someone who wasn't even an alumni. He had made it to finals, but he was still every year looking for people to apply. And he was the one who enlightened me to the opportunity. So I was 35 when I served. Nadine, maybe you want to go next.
Sure, now you're making me calculate here.
Well,
I was 34, both in the process, just because of the timing of my birthday, of applying and in the fellowship year.
And did you find out that year, or did you find out beforehand? How old were you when you found out, if you can remember, about the fellowship?
When I found out about the fellowship, I learned about the fellowship initially. I learned about the fellowship more than 5 or 6 years before I actually applied for the fellowship. So it was at a time where I knew that in my training, that I didn't feel that I was ready to actually apply for the fellowship program, but it was something that my mentor had told me about and said to think about it later on in my professional journey and career. And I was at a point in time in which I had been in clinical practice for a few years and was really thinking about making that a transition. And so applied for the fellowship and was also exploring other opportunities and was fortunate enough to be selected. And that fellowship experience then did indeed really alter the trajectory of my career. And I moved into policy and advocacy full-time as my work.
Okay. Alethea, you want to say next?
Oh, no. Well, the age, I was 30 when I applied and 31 when I became a fellow. So I think my class, there were 12 of us, as David mentioned. The youngest in my class was 28 or 29, and the oldest was maybe 41, 42. So there was a range with our class. And I'm going to make this point just because I have to get at Lewis with his happy talk comment. But just to make it clear, I am assuming that you guys, right, you will know the hard skill stuff. You will be prepared, and you show up again as the best version of you. I am a trial lawyer, and they saw that full trial lawyer and legal scholar, but I wanted to focus on those pieces because I do think that gets lost the most when we try to create somebody. And so I want to underscore that point, because yes, you need to be prepared and know all of that stuff. And you will, but you have to do that by still knowing you. So that I'm going to end with that. And Louis, I'll text you after this.
Eric, what about you?
And what I'll say is, there are some people that at your HBCU could party all night, and then you think they didn't study, and then they go and ace the test. Well, that's Shalithia. I'm the one who had to study, and I didn't go to the party. Okay, so. But that said, I was I think 29 when I applied and 30 when I became a fellow. So, yeah.
Eric?
I found out about it when I was 30, applied when I was actually, 35. I think I hit send on my birthday night, actually the weekend that I was celebrating my birthday. And then so I was 35 for most of the year.
Crystal? I thought she was, how about you, David? Well, we're waiting for Crystal to come back.
37, 38.
So that might give people some insight, Nadine, into the age question, because I think David has some data that shows that the sweet spot might be the 30s. The median age might be around 34, but it really does vary from class to class, both the minimum and the maximum age.
Yes, and it is varied. In the early years of the program, they took a few people in their early 20s, but that typically the youngest people in any given class tend to be late 20s. We had 2 people in my class who were in their 40s, but most tend to be in their 30s.
And I know Crystal, I don't think she's on right now, but
yeah, she just sent a text message. I think she is having technical difficulties.
If I remember correctly, Crystal found out when she was in high school about the White House Fellows. I'm not exactly sure how old she was, but she looks very young, so we're going to assume she was on the younger side when she actually became a White House Fellow. But again, I've heard so many stories from alumni, some who heard about it when they were in college, like many of you are doing tonight, and some of us who found out, you might say, at the last minute. But it's really different for everybody. I really loved what Shalithia said about, listen, you will hear the voice. It will say, yes, and press go, go for it.
Yeah.
So Nadine, I think we're just about done.
Great. Well, this has really, really been a lively discussion. I'm seeing a couple more comments in the chat, and we have so many who are still online listening, tuning in, and asking really great questions. We really do encourage you all to visit the website to get more information. I think if you've heard anything, it's apply. That we really encourage you to consider the White House Fellows program, whether it's this year or in a future year. It is an amazing experience. It's a transformational experience, as you can hear from all of us. And we just so appreciate that you've been interested, that you've participated in this webinar today. And we are available to answer additional questions. Margarita, I'll let you close out with any additional points for follow-up information with regards to the fellowship program.
Yeah, again, a reminder that website, that email address, recruit@whff.org for any lingering questions that we were not able to get to. You will be receiving a follow-up from all of us, with, oh, there it is right there, recruit@whff.org. But do check out the website first and make sure your question is not addressed there. If it's not, please feel free to email us at this email address. And again, I just want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, hanging in there. And we have the ability to, if there were any questions left over, we can take a look at those and get answers back to folks as well. All right. So with that said, thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.